so Donald Glover had to he threw a football to like somebody on the other side of the field. Like the technique, I was like, oh, come on, man, what are you doing with your back foot? Like, where are your hips at? He just kind of just threw his elbow forward. I was like, come on, man, like twist your wrist. Like, what are you
Yeah,
doing? Like,
not believable for a star quarterback of a high school team, you know?
all right, and we are back, episode 3 of a community rewatch. I'm Jonathan. That's Ethan. Tonight we have episodes 5 and 6 of the first season, Advanced Criminal Law, as well as Football, Feminism, and You. Starting off, extra credit. This episode we get the Dean's first timely entrance. It's a running gag, obviously, through the show. Dean's various costumes, various entrances, basically busting into the study room. We get a kind of our first crack at that this episode. Another kind of little thing, kind of continuity error. Maybe this is kind of probably just like a writing mistake or something I'm not thinking about. So the episode starts with Duncan kind of like asking Jeff, "Oh, what's the deal with Britta?" And just the episode before, social psychology, he mentions pretty clearly that he can't date students. So it's kind of like a weird continuity error there. And like even at the end, they mention how, oh, okay, he's gonna have like personal one-on-one counseling with Britta, and it's kind of insinuated that like, okay, he likes her and he's gonna try to make a move.
I mean, just because he says he can't date students, what is Duncan? He's a little bit of a shady character, so maybe he's willing to bend the rules a little bit because he thinks, I don't know. It is kind of just kind of shows him as like a slimy character, I feel like. But one thing I noticed, I didn't have a lot for this one, except for this is the birth of the legendary meme of Chang squinting at the cheat sheet. The first time I ever watched this and I saw this episode and I saw that part, I had no idea that was from Community. So that was a nice little like Easter egg because we've all seen the meme. It's kind of an older meme. It was like kind of around like early 2010s, like one of those first kind of early age of memes. So that was kind of a nice, funny. I guess seeing that when you first see the show and again rewatching this, it's just funny again. That's a great scene with Chang, him just going squinting at the cheat sheet. It's again, I just love Ken Jeong and Chang's a good character.
It's hilarious how he picks on the students like, what am I looking at? Oh, I'm looking at a crib sheet. All right. Oh, so he nails it. Absolutely. All right, A+ stuff. For me, a Dean line that just kind of comes and goes, but it definitely alludes to his character. The Dean goes, sounds like there are two biases on each side, and I go both ways. Oh, let's strike that. LaShonda, can you strike that? That's hilarious. First kind of look into the Dean's mysterious sexuality, I guess. And then I really loved the ending with Pierce playing a song, which is a ripoff of the song by Bruce Hornsby, and just the acting and the dialogue around that is great. There's a little moment in there where Annie, she's looking at Pierce like happy and smiling. They're like, oh, he figured something out, and then like she starts to slightly turn her head, like, oh, he's just ripping off Bruce Hornsby.
Yeah, this feels like on the Dean joke. It is interesting that like the first couple episodes of the show, we don't really see much of him. We get like the very first scene of the first episode where he's making the announcement. And then I think there's another scene in the second episode where you hear his voice, but you don't really see him. And then all of a sudden, like here in episode 5, he's like one of the main characters now. And there's that joke, like you said, about him. And there's kind of like some question about like his sexuality and just some humor about him being kind of this weird guy. It's kind of like the first 4 episodes, they didn't know how to write him in. And then all of a sudden, like Dan Harmon one day was just like, oh, we know what we're going to do with the Dean now. We're going to make him this kind of annoying, but, well-meaning, caring Dean who has some mysterious sexuality, as you said. It's just kind of odd, but I do like the growth, I guess, of the increase in the use of the character of the Dean. He's a good character. And I think the acting in this episode by Jim Rash is great. I think he does good in all the episodes, but for him to kind of have his like coming out party, no pun intended, it's great in this episode. The good acting. Some of the things I liked in this episode, some of the scenes and lines I really liked. One of the lines in that exchange the whole exchange with Jeff and Duncan in the hallway when he's asking about Britta, and talking. Duncan's asking about Britta, and Jeff says something about how is it you and James Bond come from the same island, and I just love that, like that American stereotype of like British people are all the same. And I know Jeff is, he's just meaning it as more of an insult, but it's just a funny line, I think. And then again, the whole Chang scene in the classroom with the cheat sheet, we get another great Starburns exchange with him and Chang, where he clarifies that his name is actually Alex, which we find out in this episode. And then Chang responds with, maybe you should spend 5 hours sculpting that into your face. It kills me every time. Chang's got some great zingers, I think.
Well, I say Starburns gets bodied in this one.
He really does. That's kind of like what he is. Just the whole show was him just like basically get up kind of the butt of the jokes, but he handles it well. And then Duncan and Chang's rivalry, we really see this storyline kind of expand more throughout the whole rest of the season too. But I want to know like what the backstory is as to why Duncan and Chang just hate each other so much, because we don't see them interact at all until this episode. And then when they're in the courtroom scene in the pool, like all of a sudden just going at it and like, you know, making snarky comments at each other. And like Duncan is very adamant that Chang, you know, calls himself Professor Chang because he's not a doctor or anything. He's not even really a teacher. And then their whole like exchange in the shower whenever they're in there. And there's that naked guy in there that's showering and they're talking in front of him. And Duncan says, "You're very confident." And then Chang's like, "You shouldn't be," which feels like kind of an ad-lib line by Zhang, but it's a great exchange, a great conversation, and it's kind of funny. I just, again, showing the weirdness of the show and, you know, the community college and the people that go there. Of course, there's going to be a guy that is fine just showering in front of these two people and is not ashamed of his body at all.
For leading the class, I have Jeff in this one. Kind of Jeff being able to step back into like that lawyer space. And you got to see in the first episode like what his talent essentially was and like, you know, what he can do with words, but like in kind of in like a more like law context in this one, it's kind of cool to see him like kind of get back into it and like actually have passion about something that like deals with Greendale, even in like the small way.
Well, I want to side note real quick. You know, we don't really see Jeff in his lawyer situations very much during the show, but we obviously do get some insight into him and being a good speaker that he is. So in terms of TV lawyers, there was somebody that was on my mind and I'm blanking now. I can't remember who I was thinking of. Oh, Saul Goodman.
Yes. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, bro.
I mean,
yes. I've been watching Better Call Saul. They just had the 5th season on Netflix. But I've already like obviously I was a big fan of Breaking Bad and now into this. But yes, Better Call Saul, yes.
I feel like we can't have that conversation for the greatest TV lawyer without Saul Goodman. But well, I'll put Jeff up there. I think you get the argument for him. For me, though, for best of the 7 in this episode, I'm going to go with Annie, just because I think it's a great episode that shows her character. And I think we don't get a lot of interactions with her and Pierce, but her interactions with him in this episode, particularly, I think where she is a little more caring, I think, than some of the other characters in the study group, where a lot of them really don't care what Pierce has to say. I think Annie does value, you know, him and what he has to bring. And I think that's a great character trait we see in her. And that whole cheerleader pep talk that she gives to him when he's writing a song, you know, about her mom telling her to keep up what she's doing, even though she's not pretty enough, or, you know, or whatever in high school. It's a funny pep talk, but at the same time, like it is kind of oddly inspiring. Yeah. When you think about it. So, you know, I think she does a great job. I think she is my favorite character in this episode of the main 7, just because I think she really pulls her weight. And I think she has great on-screen chemistry with a lot of the actors. But I think her and Pierce, Allison Brie and Chevy Chase, I think have great chemistry, especially in this episode.
And speaking to Annie too, and this speaks to her growth as the show goes. But this early like Annie, where like she's still thinking about Riverside High a lot. She does this thing where like she kind of like follows like the emotional tangent of stuff. So it like that story you're telling, you know, you're saying about, it's like, you know, just like my mom was saying that I'm not pretty enough, and like she like kind of just like always ramps it up. And you know, sometimes they leave it at Taco Bell, but you just got to keep going. And like she's like can't control herself or can't contain herself, and like they still like the way they use that in like these earlier bits. I think a moment like that happens in episode 6 as well. But like I love that. I love how she does that, where she's like she's kind of trying to get to a point where she's like exploding with trauma essentially in her own mind. All right, marked in red in this episode. So I thought this episode was not bad. Grade, I'd probably give like a 6.5 out of 10, I think. For me, it like lacks weight in the sense of like, I feel like the show, when the show's at its best, it has like either situational weight or like emotional weight. So like situational is like the paintball episode, the pillow slash blanket fort stuff where it's like there's a crazy thing happening, or like the commercial that they're trying to shoot for Green Deal, where like there's this crazy thing happening. Like everyone's trying to rally around to do this one thing, and like you kind of feel the drama of that, where it's like it's not necessarily about the characters, it's just more about trying to get something done. And again, there's obviously like emotional depth and like relational like stuff in there, but like ultimately that's what that's what you're paying to see. And then there's other episodes that are like emotionally have a lot of emotional weight, like the Dungeons and Dragons episode or the bottle episode where they all get naked, or like there's episodes like that where it's like, okay, I'm really invested, like this is character. And like I feel like the storylines in this one, I just so the big three storylines are Annie and Pierce trying to make the song for the unveiling of the Luis Guzman statue. Then we have the storyline of Abed and Troy, and Troy trying to explain to Abed what joking is. And then we have the storyline of Britta and Jeff, or more specifically, Jeff trying to help Britta escape her charge of cheating or whatever. And yeah, like I don't, I'm sitting there watching, and it's like it's not a bad episode, and I'm laughing a little bit, but like I don't care if they all fail their test. I don't really, you know what I mean? Or and yeah, just with the other storylines, I didn't find myself very interested and engaged, and like I just feel like it lacked a lot of weight for me, and like why am I supposed to care? And I get it, like oh they're gonna fail their test, but I'm like I'm not in the class. I don't. I mean like it was hard for me to kind of connect.
There are some episodes, and this is one of them, where I agree. It's hard to really like watch this episode and think like why do I really care what happened in this episode? And I would argue like I don't really think I have Abed plot. I was really weak. I'm not a fan of that plot. I feel like the other two plots with Annie and Pierce and Jeff and Britta at least show. I think there's some parts of it where you kind of like I kind of invested in this, but not really. But I mean, yeah, I agree. It's kind of like I don't. Why do I care if Pierce writes the song or not? You know what? I mean, Pierce hasn't really shown himself to be a great character anyway. I think just because he's a main character, like that's why we're supposed to care about it. I think for that plot more too is like we see it's more about we want to see Annie support him, and we want to see him kind of regain his confidence in himself. And so I think to that extent, maybe there's something there about some weight. But yeah, I mean, I feel like overall it really carries it to the point where it's memorable, or where you really watch it and you're like, man, I feel really attached to this character because I'm drawn to something that's going on. I don't feel that with this episode, and I don't hate the episode because I think there are some funny moments, but I think overall in terms of plot and storyline and to get us as the audience caring about this episode, I don't feel that connection to what's going on in the storylines, I guess.
Another thing I noticed. So last episode in social psychology, we kind of already did this thing with Britta and Jeff where they kind of had like what does it look like for us to be friends kind of conversation. Obviously Jeff at this point likes Britta, all that. In social psychology we have the conversation where like Jeff's like what level, like I don't want to be, oh I want to hear about the guys you date kind of level of friend, but I still want to be friends with you. And in this episode they kind of do that again, and they emphasize it at the end where Jeff's like, I want to be friends. I'm here not because I want to sleep with you, because I want to be friends, right? And I was just like, okay, guys, we've done this, and I was just like, what are we doing? Like we just did this. It's not like this like of 10 episodes back. Like it was last episode. We kind of had this conversation of like, okay, we get it, we're friends, and then something Britta does in this episode that like annoys me is like every individual interaction between her and Jeff, she always like insinuates that like she knows that he just wants to sleep with her. And like in their first interaction in the classroom, in the opening scene, she I guess apparently gave Jeff the wrong phone number, or like a fake phone number, more specifically. And Britta's like, oh, if I give you my real number, that, you know, are you just going to use that for friendship? And it's just like, okay. And then like the next conversation stuff, like they kind of have like that same thing where like that's when Jeff tells Britta, oh, I'm going to represent you in this case. And she's like, oh, so you can sleep with me? I'm like, okay. Like, okay. And then at the very end, when they're having recess during the trial, she's like, all you want to do is sleep with me. I'm like, okay. Like we get like, I remember just being really like frustrated, like watching them okay, we've you know driven on this road before. Like I don't know what we're.
Yeah, and one of my issue with this episode is something I back to Jeff having like the wrong number. Like Britta gave Jeff a fake number, and he's been texting this guy from Colorado Springs. I think. I don't know. Maybe they haven't like mentioned it in the previous episodes, but I have a really hard time believing that Jeff didn't already have her number because they were part of it. They've been part of a study group for, I mean, at least 4 episodes now. And so I think we can believe like in real time, like this probably a month or at this point. And like, you're telling me at some point that Jeff didn't have a reason to like text Britta and they actually, I mean, I know that's the point. He asked for her number and she gave him a fake one, but like, I don't know. It just feels like a very like convenient plot point. Like, I don't think, to me, I don't think Jeff seems like the kind of guy that would get outwitted by that. I don't know. It's not a huge issue. Maybe it's something I'm overthinking, but when I rewatching this, I was just kind of, I don't know. It didn't really seem that realistic that Jeff would get duped by Britta giving him a fake number because he's a lawyer. And he, I think, is smarter than that. But I mean, I think Britta's smart too. And I think that I'm not saying Jeff couldn't get outsmarted by her, but yeah, you know, the whole Jeff Britta thing, I agree with you. It just seems, I like the plot because I think it's an important part of season 1. And, you know, there's a storyline they can't just do for 1 episode. Like it's going to take time. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of a repetitive joke. And they kind of beat a dead horse with the Britta, you know, saying that she knows Jeff wants to sleep with her. It's just, it's like there's one joke and they keep using that with Britta. And like that's every time she and Jeff interact, like they bring that up. A little bit maybe lazy writing, but I don't know. And then one of the other things about this episode, I mentioned it earlier. I don't like the Troy and Abed plot in this episode. I don't think it's funny. I get what Abed's doing. You know, he's becoming more meta, and he's showing again how he is kind of relating to TV. He doesn't really get joking. He's still kind of learning, I think, the friendship thing too, which I think is some good character, you know, a good character backstory, kind of some growth to show that Abed he's still struggling to learn how to make friends and what to do. But I don't know, the way Troy responds to what Abed's trying to do, it irritates me. I think there's a better way that they could have written that to where Troy explains to Abed like, hey, this is a little overboard. I know. It just kind of feels like he almost like gets mad at Abed and like we're just supposed to like assume that's okay. And I don't know. Again, maybe I'm reading too much into that scene, but that whole plot and then the resolution of that plot, I'm not super satisfied with, and it's a little problematic to me. I just think it's not a great plot overall. There's not much really humor to it, and I feel like it's just kind of an extra plot that they just threw in just so they could have a third plot with Troy and Abed. It does show some background on their friendship, and it does kind of further their relationship that obviously is a huge part of the show. So I guess it's important to that.
Like the best thing out of that storyline was like they did their handshake. I thought, and agree with you, like I thought that the ending of that storyline was just flat. Garrett runs in and it's like, and then it just kind of ends, and it didn't feel like there was a real resolution or like a real like thing. And again, like it would have been more predictable and obvious, but it just would have been better if kind of like what Troy said, like it would have been better if out of it, you know, was an alien. But, like it would have been better if Troy was completely fooled and they just played into that where it's like he, you know, I don't know, passes out or whatever. And it's like Abed being like, I think we went too far. And then like that's it. And it's like that maybe that ends it or whatever. But like I agree with you. I feel like that storyline just kind of ended flat. Kind of it felt kind of filler-y.
And then another final nitpick I had, and again, more of a minor thing, but just something more funny that I thought, going back to Annie's cheerleading speech that she gives to Pierce, says that her mom told her she had no boobs, or, you know, like she couldn't do a basket toss. Like, are we really supposed to believe that Annie wasn't that pretty and had no boobs in high school? Like, Allison Bree's obviously a very attractive lady, and like this is only like a year or two after Annie was in high school. Like she's, I think, like a freshman in college at this point. So like, I don't know. It's just kind of like, you know, it kind of like in the movies, like the whole trope of like, you know, there's supposed to be this really nerdy, unattractive girl, but they pick like a really famous actress to play her, and like we're not really, we don't really ever buy that she's unattractive and nerdy. Like kind of is what I feel like with this, but again, it's just a minor thing. It's just more of a funny, like, yeah, I'm not buying that. It makes for a funny, you know, funny lines, a good moment, but I don't buy that she wasn't pretty in high school or people thought she wasn't pretty.
into football, feminism, and you. Extra credit, Jeff and Annie's first solo interaction. There wasn't like a lot here, I noticed, in terms of like extra little bits, but like obviously with Jeff and Annie, they're probably the most popular of like the will they won't they kind of relationships that happen in the show. And so it's kind of neat to kind of see their first reaction.
Yeah, so my one little tidbit of trivia for this episode, some internet research. Just since this is a football episode, I don't know where else this would fit in, but Joel McHale actually attempted to be football team at the University of Washington when he was in college. So, yeah, don't know what to do with that information. Just thought it was kind of interesting since this episode's about football. But yeah, that's about all for that.
For A+ stuff, A+ scenes, Pierce, I think this is one of Pierce's best lines in the show. So the dean walks in and the dean's like, "Oh, what are we doing here? There's all sorts here." Like talking about the diversity in the room, and Pierce goes, "Well, we are looking for a pipsqueak, but we don't want one, so beat it." And I was like, "Ooh, okay, Pierce." Like that was a good line, a little shot by him. This is probably the thing that made me laugh the hardest in the episode was Troy's conservative like rap snippets. Oh my goodness, I don't know why that cracked me up so much, but I don't know, it just felt like very like corny '90s. Oh, we're going to try to speak to the kids and just that kind of energy. And I found it hilarious, and like the way they just used it throughout the episode was just super funny. Annie talking to Britta in the restroom about Troy. This is I know we talk about this pretty much every week with this show, but like just like the deep lines where Annie's talking to Britta about Troy, and she's like, "I can't control him, and if I truly cared about him, I wouldn't want to." I'm like, "Oof, gosh, I'm applying to my life out here." Like, and then there's like it's not a very long scene, but it's when Shirley and Britta. Oh yeah, when Shirley and Britta first have like their first restroom meeting in the ladies' room. And it's really good acting by Yvette Nicole Brown. So Britta walks into the stall, and then the camera's just on Yvette Nicole Brown's face. And obviously in the ladies' room, it's just like, "Hey, support me." That's like kind of the energy. And then Britta doesn't know how to do that. And so she kind of like ruins it, being the worst. And so, but Yvette Nicole Brown, her face, like just in that 1 to like minute and a half of acting, goes from like optimistic and like happy that Britta's with her to like confused. Oh, she's not getting this, and then like hurt, and then like disappointed, and then at the very end, she's just like annoyed and just like blocks out Britta with the fan of the hand warmers. But I just loved like that little bit of acting from her. Like it was and it was all in her face. It was just slowly and meticulously, like just the way she did that, I just thought was incredible.
I agree. That scene is great. It's great facial acting. And she doesn't really say anything in that scene while Britta's talking, but you make a great point. This episode really doesn't have like a lot of like standout lines or moments to me in terms of like humor and jokes, but the acting in this episode is probably like some of the best in the show. We get some great acting by Yvette Nicole Brown, who we just mentioned. I think Donald Glover probably like this is like his kind of breakout for the show. I think this is like his first big episode where we really start to see him shine. The scene with him coming back into the cafeteria where he's doing the raps, the conservative raps, but like just that whole sequence of him, like him and Jeff on the football field, and then him coming back in, and like he's changed now and he's more cocky and confident, and he doesn't really care more about school. Like this, Donald Glover crushes this episode, I think, with his acting, and I think he's kind of the star of this episode. Just he really pops out on the screen in terms of his talent. And I would also argue like Jim Rash, I mentioned him, I think, for the dean for the previous episode too, but like he does a great job. His interactions with Pierce when they're trying to find the mascot, and he comes into the study room, we get the first one of those interactions with the dean and the study group where he comes in and is addressing them and they get annoyed. I think that it shows his range of just his acting style. I think Jim Rash is a great actor as well, and I think he does a tremendous job as the dean throughout this whole series because he doesn't get a ton of screen time, but with what screen time he has, I think he crushes it. So I think this episode shows just some of the great acting skills that maybe sometimes go unnoticed. I mean, there are some funny moments like Troy and Jeff on the football field and their whole exchange. And there's the whole, that's gay, that's homophobic, that's black, that's racist. And it's a classic exchange. And I think it's some great writing. They're very short, almost one-liner lines. There's not like a lot of extreme, these giant grandeur dialogues, but it's just a good back and forth. And again, I think the chemistry, I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but like there's a lot of good chemistry between all the different actors, and like when we see them interact, and then the whole human being, there's just a lot about that storyline that I think I appreciate, and I think it's funny. It does seem a little bit like, looking back, it was kind of ahead of its time, because obviously now we're seeing like mascots, racist mascots being like in the news, and like we've seen, the Washington football team and the Cleveland baseball team have now changed their names for racial connotations. But it's just, I mean, Community kind of predicted the future, because I mean, I know at this time, like there was kind of that debate about, should we be making mascots based off of people groups? Should we be making or should we be associating racial connotations with sports team nicknames? And Community, they take kind of a humorous approach to it, but they're not making fun of those groups. They're making fun of the people who want to keep those nicknames. And I think they handle it very well. I think it's a good, they're not trying to be preachy about it, but I mean, it makes you think. It's funny because they were kind of ahead of their time, and the dean trying to pick a mascot that's not offensive to anybody. I think Community predicted the future, it's an awesome part of the show, I guess. But and then that whole exchange with the dean, and there's that scene with, I think Jeff comes in, and the dean and Pierce have been talking, and they've obviously been planning, and there's the human color wheel and it goes from seal to seal's teeth. And I mean, it's like one of those where you shouldn't laugh, but it's, I don't know, it's just like edgy enough to like kind of make you like stop. But then I don't know, it's I just think it's a great joke, and I don't know if it's one that stands up now maybe, but I don't know. I think there's just that whole storyline of them trying to pick a mascot is great. And of course we get the terrifying result of that at the end with the human being mascot that comes up at the end and is obviously made of nightmares. And we see him throughout the episode, but I think it's a great plot for this episode. And then one last thing, in terms of, great lines that aren't jokes, you mentioned like Annie talking to Britta, and that great line that she has about, I can't control him. If I truly cared about him, I wouldn't want to. I think Troy has a great line as well when he's talking to Jeff at the end, and he's just like, you should try accepting where you're at, man. And that line, it kind of just hits you, because like Troy's calling out Jeff, and like I think there's some realness to it behind it. There's obviously a caring, Troy cares about Jeff. I think they have a good friendship, but it's kind of a real moment there in the midst of all of the jokes and the comedy, like accepting where you're at. And that's, I think, a common theme throughout the show. And we talked about it a little bit, I think, in our first episode, but Jeff, it continues to struggle with that throughout the show, and grows in that way where he starts to accept in the moment, in the present, living where he's at instead of living for the future. It's just a great line. And again, I just love Donald Glover in this episode. I love him for anything else, but especially in this episode, I think he does a great job.
I like how you mentioned putting that line too, because one of the implications from the episode is that, like, because Annie kind of alluded to this a little bit, but like Troy will do the things that Jeff like convinces him to do, because, and again, the idea is like Troy kind of looks up to Jeff as like an older, cool dude. And like I like that idea of like Troy, who again probably looks up to Jeff a little bit, actually kind of giving him some wisdom. And like as you mentioned, like that's the struggle of Jeff, especially especially early on. It's like, hey, like you're here, so you might as well be here, not try to like eliminate yourself out of this space and out of these people's lives, and you might as well just be here. You mentioned the exchange between Troy and Jeff on the football field. I think like besides like Donde está la biblioteca and that, I think those two things might be the most like probably most popular like clips of the show, which is kind of funny that we kind of get those early on, but like I can't think of like a more popular moment, because ultimately like the paintball episodes are like the most popular episodes, or the most kind of like widely known, but I don't think there's like a more widely known moment than like those two. For leading the class, you mentioned his performance earlier, but I have Dean Pelton for sure. It's cool that his character shines in this episode. And something I love that like it stays pretty consistent with the Dean is that like he loves Greendale, and he's in this situation, he's willing to blackmail Jeff for the sake of Greendale. And it's kind of funny, like with that situation, like Dean Pelton wins in whatever, and like if he wins by having like Jeff on his like on the posters because like Jeff's like a tall, attractive kind of guy, but he also wins if Troy plays football again, and so like the just I don't know, it's kind of cool to like see him. I feel like when it comes to Greendale, like he's actually like, kind of smart and like really tries to apply himself and kind of calculating and like kind of willing to do what it takes. And I just think it's kind of cool that like his character stays pretty consistent throughout. Like it twists and turns a little bit, and like obviously his comfort with the green like the main cast kind of changes. But overall, I think he just stars in this episode, and like you really got to kind of get to see him shine in this one.
Yeah, I feel like the Dean that it kind of reminds me of Michael Scott's character from The Office, because you kind of question like how cut out of these guys really to do their job. I mean, they're both they have very important jobs. They're in charge of people, and in the Dean's case, he's like the dean of a school, and they do have their moments where they're idiots. But when it comes to doing their job, like I go back to like in The Office, the Michael Scott, like whenever he has Michael Scott Paper Company, and they have the meeting with David Wallace, and they're talking about selling the company, and Michael, he has some great, he fights for his employees, he's fighting for his company. He knows what he's doing. Like when it comes to business and it comes to managing people, like he knows what he's doing. And same for the Dean. And I think he's kind of probably clueless about a lot of maybe reality, and maybe even just like, these are the societal like norms of stuff. That this is how, like, you don't just put somebody on a school poster without asking them. But like when it comes to like the school itself, he really does care about the students, and he knows what he's doing as a dean. And I like that they don't just write him into just being the buffoon character. I agree. I think that he does have a lot of importance to the show, and there's kind of some wholesomeness in that. Like he's there for like a comedic side character, but he also does have some importance, I think, to the show, and he does care about the students and about the school. And we see that a lot later too, in some of the later seasons with it. I went with Troy for this one. I think the Dean is a standout in this episode, but I'm going to go with Troy. Just I'm sticking with the Greendale 7. Like I mentioned earlier, I think Donald Glover just crushes this episode. His acting is superb. Just a lot of great lines. I think his delivery is great. I think his comedic timing probably unparalleled in this show, and just the way he reacts, his actions and his motions. You really just get a good sense of the character in this episode. We see some really good character development for Troy, and we start to get more of his backstory. And I think this is kind of that moment where we go from the Troy in like the first 4 episodes, who was more of, or first 5 episodes, pardon me, who was just more of like he's in high school, but he's still just out of high school, like into college. So like I think after this episode, from here on out, we get college Troy, where he's a little more mature. He's still learning a lot, but he's not the person he once was, and he's not attached to his past anymore. He's wanting to be a new person and enjoy himself in college. I think we get a lot of growth there, and I like that for this episode. Just the growth of Troy, and again, the acting of Donald Glover is superb. He's, I think, the best in this episode for me.
Yeah, I think with Troy too in this episode, we see him kind of go because in those first few episodes, he's a little more protective of like his reputation, a little more protective of like just himself. That makes sense, kind of in a new space. You kind of like they point out that he wears his Letterman jacket, kind of like showing like, yeah, I'm still the man, or at least I think I'm still the man, or at least I want you to think that I'm still the man, kind of thing. And I feel like, yeah, in this episode, he of course Donald Glover's acting is great, but like the way Troy kind of goes about, like he's a little more expressive in this episode, and he's a little more communicative and just kind of open to I guess kind of what Greendale kind of has to offer. Yeah, it just really works. For Marked in Red, okay, so this is like just a brief moment. So the opening scene, Jeff like takes a pass at Britta, and the thing about it is like it's weird in the sense of like because it's Abed, Troy, and Pierce are still in the room, and it's when Annie and Shirley go to the restroom, and Jeff is like, you know, yeah, he says something like, "Oh, you know what? Really like, or get to know your feminine side, sleeping with me," or so he says something like that, like going out, or yeah, and like it was just kind of weird because like he would like early in the season, he would like invite her out for drinks or get dinner or whatever, but like he just kind of like says like sleep with me, and it's just like I don't know. It felt out of character. It didn't feel very like it didn't feel very suave. It didn't feel very put together or whatever. It was just kind of weird.
It's kind of
Am I
creepy
am I
too.
overthinking that?
No, it's kind of creepy. I mean, I I think we're supposed to just pretend like it's okay because they're friends and Jeff isn't actually being super pushy. But you say something like that, like now, I mean, that's like that's gonna get you in trouble, you know. I mean, that's not like that wouldn't fly in real life at all. And I agree, it's just kind of I think it's a little bit out of character for Jeff. I feel like he's a little more respectful than that usually.
This was more of a curiosity, but so Annie's saying, well, Troy, you don't notice people that like you for more than superficial reasons. But then I was kind of thinking about it, I'm like, okay, but what does Annie actually like about Troy? And I don't I don't know. Like I think we have like maybe one or other like maybe one or two more episodes where like Annie is still into Troy, but like I don't think she's actually ever even said like what she likes about him or like what's been clear. And like the only thing I can like kind of glean from their interactions is like I feel like she still kind of likes him for like his popularity, his standing in high school, his confidence from that. I'm not sure if she like actually likes him for anything for his for his intangibles because it's like Troy's not very respectful of you. Troy's not very smart. Troy's not very I don't know. Like it doesn't seem like he doesn't or it doesn't seem like there's anything about Troy that Annie would actually like that's not superficial.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that, but I think you make a good point on that. I do think it's kind of a weird line for her to say that because I agree. Like she's obviously into Troy because he's popular and because he was popular in high school. You know, she I think to some extent Annie is infatuated with Troy because he's kind of her last. She's still living that high school girl next door. You know, she I think has a lot of shame about high school, and she probably thinks that if she could get with Troy now in college, everything that happened to her in high school doesn't matter because she's with the popular quarterback. She's with him. She gets to date him, and like everything's fine now. She's popular and she's cool. She's got her life together. But like that's still a superficial reason. You know, it's a selfish reason to like somebody. We obviously know that like they didn't know each other really in high school because Troy doesn't even like remember her from high school. So like there's obviously no way that like they'd even would have had a connection to where like, oh, she talked to him a couple of times and she just thought he was nice and caring. Like there's nothing that shows us, unless it's something we don't see in these early episodes, like while they're in college, that would say that Annie is drawn to Troy for anything other than the fact that he was a quarterback and he was popular in high school. There's so I agree. It's just kind of a weird thing for her to say. And I think I think that's part of the plot is that she's realizing that she doesn't probably really like Troy for the right reasons. And I think that's some growth we see from her. But it is kind of a weird line when she's saying that he doesn't notice people who only like him for like who like him for more than superficial reasons because she is one of those people. So it just doesn't really make a lot of sense with the plot. But so one of my other big nitpicks for this episode, and it's not just for this one, it is this episode, but for some of the other episodes as well in this early part of season one, there's always one character who seems to get left out of the storylines. In this episode, it's Abed, and they play it off really funny where he kind of overplayed his shtick in the last episode, so he's gonna lay low, and it works. It's funny, but like I wish that they could find a way in this episode and like this episode we didn't see Shirley at all. I know it's hard to balance 7 characters plus side characters, and like it's hard to do balancing storylines, but I feel like I just wish that we could get all of them in. I just love them all so much that I hate seeing one of them like kind of not get used, especially Abed, but I mean any of them really, because I think they all bring stuff. And at this point now we know a lot more about the characters. There's really, I feel like no reason in season 1 where like we're 6 episodes in, why can't we involve them all? We've seen them all kind of interact with each other already. So, I don't know. I wish that they could involve them more. It's not a huge nitpick, but it's more of a wish that, if I could have rewritten this season 1, that maybe they could involve all the characters. But, I know that's part of writing a TV show and producing a TV show. It's hard to get 7 characters, I'm sure, all into plots that are meaningful and using them correctly or using them well.
No, I agree. And like, they're still kind of like figuring it out in sense of like, how do we represent these connections, how we build them, who's closer to who, and like because I think of like later seasons in the show, like they're pretty good in terms of like having all the main characters in the same place or the same setting, being able to have a conversation or do whatever. But there's at this point in the series, they're still kind of figuring it out, and you can tell they're kind of figuring it out. And yeah, it ends up like, and again, they played off in this episode well, where it's like, Albert has kind of that one liner where it's like, I'll back off this week, and it's funny, like that works. And then like, did you notice like he kind of like he has like a little bit of a cameo in the episode where like he shows up like just walking, like that's
Yeah.
good, you know what I mean? And it would have been like, gosh. Well, I guess they do this later in the series where like Abed like delivers a baby,
Yeah.
like so it's like some of the stuff like that would have been nice, but yeah, like kind of like you mentioned, like they're kind of figuring it out on the fly, and I mean, good thing they do, but yeah, it's noticeable in this one. And then kind of like my last point is what this episode is. I don't know, I'd probably say okay overall, but feels a little unfocused. I was kind of going through my head. I'm like, yeah, there's like four storylines. You have the stuff between like Annie and Troy, then you have the stuff between Shirley and Britta, and you have Dean and Pierce who are trying to make the perfect mascot, and then you have the Dean. He is blackmailing Jeff so he can get Troy to play football, and like that's its own storyline. And I wonder, it's in my mind, like in my mind, I'm thinking like I think they would probably, okay, if this was season 3, what would this episode like look like or be? And I feel like it would either be like a football episode, like they go all in on that, and like maybe it's at a game or something like that where it's just like all into like that area. And obviously that's kind of like a bigger budget than like showing a crappy field and some old players. Or I wonder like if in a later season, like this looks like the whole episode takes place in like the ladies' room, where it's like they like expand the ladies' room, and then like it becomes like the entire cafeteria. It's like everyone is in the ladies' room, but it's like then you lose you lose like the speciality of it. So it's like it's almost like the the encouraging space of the ladies' room like expands to the school, and it's like I don't know. It'll almost be kind of like a Meow Meow Beans kind of episode kind of thing. At least that's kind of what I was thinking about in my head.
I wish we could see those ideas because I think those would have been better than this one. I don't really like this episode. It feels weak, and it kind of sucks because I think these two episodes both I think are kind of weak in terms of plot. They're just kind of there as filler episodes. I think that the B plots in this episode are actually better to me than the Troy football plot. I know I've raved about Donald Glover and Troy. Like I think he does great with what he's given, but I think that plot overall is just there's a lot more they could have done with it. I agree. I think they could have done either a football episode or just I don't know, done more with that plot. I think there's a lot of potential there for it, and it kind of feels like it was kind of a letdown. I think they kind of missed an opportunity with that. I think the B plots actually work better for me, or at least I think they do well with those, with the screen time that they give to those B plots, and they do with the Troy football plot. I think the Pierce and the Dean picking a mascot, I think it's just funny. The whole girls' room plot. I mean, I can't relate to it because I'm not a lady, but I think there's kind of an emotional attachment to that plot where it is. We do see kind of Britta show her annoying side, but then we also see her show her emotional side, and she's kind of real with Shirley. And then we see Annie, kind of show her realness with Britta. But I feel like those plots for me are just a lot stronger than the main plot of Troy and the football team. I don't know. It's not a bad episode, I guess. I'd probably give it like a 6 out of 10, but it's just kind of a weak middle episode. I feel like there's a lot more they could have done with it, and I'm fine with it the way it is. But I wish we could have seen some kind of like Friday Night Lights like parody or something.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many football movies and TV shows they could have done a parody of. And I mean, this is a little early on. Like we haven't seen them get to that parody status yet where they were doing spoofs and stuff. Maybe later on, because, they never mentioned Troy and the football team again after this, I don't think.
I can't
I don't
remember
think it never shows it. So like either he quits the team, in which case this episode is meaningless really. And like after this episode, or he's on the team and we just never see him talk about it or play in the games, which is a waste as well. Like seems like they could have done so much with that, So
yeah, I will say though, like so Donald Glover had to throw. He threw a football to like somebody on the other side of the field, like the technique, I was like, oh, come on, man, what are you doing with your back foot? Like, where are your hips at? I was just, he just kind of just threw his elbow forward. I was like, come on, man, like twist your wrist. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah,
Like,
not believable for a star quarterback of a high school team, you know?
yeah, like, come on, let him get a few reps in. Like, gee.